When I was around 24 years old, I moved to LA and took a job as an ESL teacher at a private school for international students. I had very little experience teaching, so one of the other instructors, Heather, took me under her wing. I thought Heather was pretty cool. She was in her early 30s, had traveled the world, and had been a professional ski instructor in Colorado, and seemed like a fairly put-together individual. We went to book fairs and shopping and even had lunch on a regular basis, and nothing ever seemed off or unusual about her. One night around 10 p.m., I got a frantic call from Heather. She seemed genuinely panicked and told me somebody was trying to hurt her. She was crying so hard I couldn't make out most of what she was saying. She said that she was driving to my house and she was going to stay on her portable phone until it lost signal. This was before cell phones were very common. About 20 minutes later, she shows up at my door drunk off her ass, still clutching her phone. She tells me that her mother is a satanic witch and is trying to cast a spell on her to kill her, that she needs to be somewhere safe. After spending an hour trying to calm her down, she asked if she can use my phone. I say sure, and she proceeds to call her ex-boyfriend long distance from my house, 12 times to leave creepy Linda Blair growlings and unintelligible animal noises on his answering machine. By now, I am desperate to get rid of her and more than a little bit afraid. I didn't own a car, so I offered to drive her home in her car, and she said she would give me cash to take a cab home. She lived about 7 miles away, so it didn't take long to get her there. She begged me to come up to her apartment to make sure it was safe. I get her into her apartment, and things get really ugly quickly. I tell her, "While it looks safe to me, I'd best be on my way." And she suddenly turns around with the most evil and predatory look on her face, points at a can of what looks like to be bear mace at me and says, "You aren't going anywhere." This was some seriously creepy stuff. Like serial killer behavior even. I cooperated with her as best as I could, participating in a weird ritual that she concocted to protect her from her mother's spell. Watching her roll her eyes, contort her body and make gurgling noises and speak in tongues. And every once in a while, she would lunge at me and hiss like a lizard. The entire time, she had the can of mace in one hand and was waving around a butcher knife in the other. She kept stabbing at imaginary demons with the knife and making hissing noises. It was unreal. When she seemed to calm down a bit, she made me sit on her couch and debate the difference between Stendhal's view of the French aristocracy versus Desailles. I shit you not, she was mostly incoherent, and I haven't read Stendhal, so the conversation was sort of like this scene in The Vampire's Kiss, where Nicolas Cage is talking to his imaginary girlfriend on the street at the end. I tried to act normal, like we were just having a typical conversation, and I didn't have a ginormous can of mace pointed at me. Every once in a while, I would casually mention that I should probably head out, and she would begin to get agitated again, even once barking at me like a dog until I sat back down. By this point, I was more tired and angry than afraid, but her behavior was so unpredictable, I couldn't be sure what she was capable of. She mentioned having a gun and asked me if I wanted to see it, and I thankfully managed to distract her by offering to make her another drink. This lasted several hours. She always had either the mace or the knife in her hand, usually both, and at one point she even had me get out her family photo albums for us to look at. She continued to drink more, and each time she had to pee, she left the door to the bathroom open so she could see me. Since the bathroom was across from the front door, I didn't want to risk it. Finally, she became so drunk that she forgot to leave the door open, and I made my escape. I ran down the steps of her apartment building and out into the streets of Hollywood at 3:30 a.m. I'd only been living there a few months. I had no idea where I was, had no money, and didn't know where an ATM was, and I didn't have anybody I could call for help. I started walking, and a cab pulled over and asked me if I needed a ride. I explained the situation to the driver, and he took pity on me and drove me home for free. The following Monday at work, she acted like nothing had happened. She didn't even seem to remember calling me that night. I said nothing, avoided her like the plague, and eventually left that job about 2 weeks later for a better paying one. My mom and I moved into a completely normal, average house when I was about 15. Everything was fine and we loved it. One day I was homesick from school and I was messing around on the computer when I heard our garage door open. I freaked out and went down the hall to get my mobile phone and saw the hallway door that connects to the garage opening. I panicked and yelled, "Get out!" And two young boys slammed the door and ran off. I started crying and called my mom. I don't know why I didn't call the police first, who told me to go to the next door to my neighbors, and she was going to come home from work. When she got home, she was speaking to my neighbor for a bit. The neighbor ended up telling us that she thought it was probably the young boy that lived in the house before us. Apparently, he sometimes goes around to everyone's houses and breaks in and eats their food and watches TV and stuff. And for whatever reason, they were all okay with that. Apparently, he came from some sort of broken home and they all felt sorry for him, so they didn't call the police. Mom and I were completely unsettled by that and put new locks on all the doors that week. We didn't care if the other neighbors were okay with that. We weren't. A few months pass and nothing ever happens again. We figure that he knows we're not cool with his weirdness and doesn't try to break in again. A week or so later, I'm in bed asleep and I wake up in the middle of the night for no reason at all. I'm not hot or cold. I don't need to pee. I didn't have a nightmare. I just woke up. I had this incredibly uneasy and weird feeling wash over me. I felt like something or someone was watching me and I got completely freaked out. I went into my mom's room and slept in her bed that night. It kept happening for a few nights and I thought I was just having nightmares or was getting scared of the dark for some reason. I ended up sleeping in my mom's bed for about a week because I was so legit scared of the dark now. I finally worked up the courage to sleep in my own bed one night, but I could barely sleep. I felt totally uneasy and nervous and scared. I got to sleep for a bit, but then I woke up again. I looked outside my window and I could swear I saw the face/figure of someone standing there, and obviously I noped the heck out and ran back to my mom. One of the nights I was back in her bed, we were all asleep and feeling fine when I woke up to my dog on the end of the bed growling. Now, our dog is an old golden retriever and has never growled or barked at anything. She is a huge wuss and completely placid. She has no problem with strangers. Even if somebody knocks on the door and comes in, she couldn't care less. So I wake up all dazed, confused, and half asleep. I hear the dog growling and I'm asking her, "What's wrong?" I look up from the bed and I shit you not, there was a man standing in the doorway with a knife. I screamed like a banshee and the dog started barking at this point. Mom woke up and saw the man too. He went running down the hallway and back out the door. I'm crying my eyes out and the dog is barking her face off, and Mom is frantically trying to call the police. An hour later they finally get here and of course the dude is gone. Morning comes and we go outside to see that the back gate has had its lock cut with bolt cutters, and the door leading into the house has been smashed in. The cops come in and dust for prints and leave shit everywhere, but at the end of the day, they can't find and don't do anything. We moved out that same day and went to live with my grandma and grandpa until we found a new house. Pretty much nobody in the family believed us or thought we were just making it up for attention. My family are assholes. A few weeks later, we get a call from the police and they managed to match the prints to some teenager who just got arrested for breaking into another house. It's the same guy that was breaking into all the houses in the neighborhood and used to live in the house that we were in. So Mom's talking to the cops and some of the neighbors when suddenly somebody tells us, completely casually, "Oh yeah, that's the Milat kid." Wait, did they just say Milat? Yeah, pretty much any Australian will know his last name. Ivan Milat, the serial killer. His nephew was breaking into people's homes, and our home, while we were sleeping, with a knife, and people were okay with that. So anyways, we moved into a new house and forgot all about it, until about a year ago. He and his friend murdered another teenager in the same place his uncle dumped all of those bodies. What the heck? So, the guy that broke into our house, watched me while I was asleep, and stood in our bedroom doorway with a knife while we were sleeping, actually murdered another teenager a few years later. Mom and I nearly fell over when we heard about it. Nobody really believed us, which pisses me off, but it really happened. Sometimes when I think back on what could have happened if I slept in my own bed that night, or if the dog didn't bark, or if we would have never woken up, it really freaks me out. It's also left me with a huge fear of the dark. I get really uneasy if I have to go outside at night by myself or if I wake up in the middle of the night. Sometimes I even have a panic attack when I go outside to put the bins out at night now. My husband and I are night owls, and when we were newly married, we had a habit of going to the gym pretty late and always ended up with a quick soak in the hot tub. One night, as we went to the hot tub at about midnight, there was already another average-looking guy sitting in the hot tub. He struck up some small talk with us and explained that he was from Washington and was passing through town on his way to camp at some sand dunes a couple of hours south of where we were in Utah. These sand dunes are completely isolated and far away from any major populated areas. Kind of a strange place to camp if you are unfamiliar with the state. He also tells us he is a house painter and just works through referrals because that way he can work on the fly and can't be tracked. Okay. This guy is really talkative. Like we can barely get a word in and are mostly just sitting there listening. Somehow he turns the conversation to conspiracy theories, 9/11, the government controlling us, etc. At this point, we kind of just politely pretend to be interested, but I am starting to get weird vibes from him. The guy starts telling us drug stories about how he has always loved to party. His neighbors ended up hating him because he was always partying. They called the cops on him because he had abandoned a car on their property and wouldn't move it, so he hated them. I wish I could remember all the details, but it's been like 4 years since this happened. He tells us the reason he is out here is because of his neighbors. The tip to the cops was that he was involved in a murder case that he swears he has nothing to do with. Also, this isn't the first time something like this has happened to him. He said he was getting too much media attention, so he had to leave and has been camping the whole trip, so the cops can't find him. He is paranoid though because robotic CIA planes have been tracking him in the desert. He just knows it. At this point, we are pretty freaked out. Almost an hour has passed sitting here listening to him. There is a lull in the conversation and it gets super uncomfortable. All of a sudden, the guy realizes he has said way too much to us, and next thing we know, he is getting out of the hot tub and is gone. It is late and we are super creeped out. I remember making a mental note that there is a surveillance camera in the room and this guy is on tape. We hurry and get out and I am the only one in the women's locker room. My heart was beating so fast and I was getting dressed faster than I ever had before. Once we leave and drive home, we both agree this guy definitely had something to do with the murder that he was talking about. We make sure all of the doors are locked and I am freaking out that he followed us or something. My husband is usually calm and never freaks out about stuff like this, but he had his gun ready to load just in case. Neither of us could sleep in fear that this creep was outside of our apartment, and we started looking up details online. We found the murder they were talking about and saw that there were suspects for the case, and the main suspect was linked to another couple of murders that happened in the woods in Washington. They could never make an arrest in the case because they didn't have concrete evidence, but they were sure they knew who did it, and the guy in that case was arrested for some time because the neighbors reported an abandoned car. What? It is the guy from the hot tub who killed the girls and was suspected of the murder now. We couldn't sleep until morning, and the next day we tried to find somewhere to leave tips to help solve the case. My husband sent them an email with a few details about talking to the man in the hot tub. The day after, an agent from the FBI called him for the full story. He ended with telling him he had been really helpful and thanking him. We tried to keep looking up details on the case but never really found anything. I have long since forgotten your name, but murderer in the hot tub, let's not meet again. When I was a teenager, I lived in a small town located about 30 miles south of Atlanta, Georgia. I did not get my driver's license or my first car until I was almost 20 years old, so between the ages of 16 and 19, I hitchhiked frequently. This was in the early 70s when people still hitchhiked and many drivers were still willing to pick people up in spite of the dangers and risks posed to both driver and rider. For the most part, I never had any trouble with the people who offered me rides, but occasionally I would get picked up by somebody who would totally creep me out. This is a story about one creepy ride I accepted and how 25 years later, I would discover to my great shock that I may have been much luckier at the time than I had ever imagined. This incident occurred sometime in the summer of 1974 when I was 17 years old. At that time, I was a 6-foot-tall, 175-pound, blonde-haired, blue-eyed guy who did not have any trouble connecting with girls for dates. In fact, my story begins with me standing on the side of the highway with my thumb out as I was trying to get back home after spending the weekend with my girlfriend, who lived in downtown Atlanta. I was traveling south, away from the city and out into the country, where I lived with my parents. I recall that I had only had my thumb out for maybe 15 minutes when a man in a big white Lincoln Town Car, a very large and expensive car at the time, pulled over. As I walked up to the car, I scanned the inside and looked at the driver, trying to size the situation up as I always did just to be safe. What I saw was a tidy car with a man in the driver's seat who looked to be in his late 30s or mid-40s, dressed in an expensive suit and tie. He had short black hair, wore black-rimmed eyeglasses, and appeared to be rather on the thin side with a gaunt face and dark eyes. I never learned his name, but for the sake of this story, I'm going to call him Town Car Man. When I got to the passenger side of the car, I leaned down toward the open window and told him where I was heading to and asked him if he was going that far, to which he replied that he was in a soft voice and waved me into the car. I was not at all wary of him, as, by all appearances, he was just an ordinary middle-class businessman, and I opened the door and got into the front seat next to him without any hesitation. Generally, when I accepted rides from strangers while hitchhiking, I like to try and engage them in chat, sort of as a way to pay them for the ride by providing good conversation, and also to put them at ease about picking me up, by showing them that I was harmless and not a creep. Even though I felt that I did not at all look dangerous necessarily, unless you could call having long hair and dressing in the hippie fashion of the time dangerous. However, whenever I began trying to chat with the town car man in my normal fashion, with typical small talk, I instantly started getting bad vibes from him, as I could tell that he was mostly ignoring what I was saying and instead kept trying to steer the conversation toward asking me personal questions about myself, such as how old I was, where I went to school, if I had a girlfriend, etc. I tried to answer his questions as politely as possible without really giving away much real information, but Town Car Man kept getting more and more personal, asking questions that hinted at whether or not I was sexually active with my girlfriend, and telling me that when he was my age, he went around horny about half the time, and had always been on the lookout for sexual adventures. As the ride progressed and we were going further and further out into the country, I began to get very uneasy as I started to sense that something was not quite right with him. We had left a populated city behind and were now traveling down an old 2-lane highway through countryside that was sparsely populated. There seemed to be hardly any cars on the road. The more that Town Car Man continued to ask me questions about myself, wanting to know very personal things about me, like if I ever had sex with my girlfriend, all while glancing over at me from time to time, with a sort of creepy, knowing look in his eye, as if he were privately enjoying some dirty secret that only he knew about, the more uncomfortable I became. I don't know how better to describe it than that, and it really began to make me feel uneasy, as his manner seemed very cagey, and I totally sensed that there was some underlying motive to his questioning. It really put me on guard. I began to think about what I should do next, and should I ask him to pull over and let me out, even though I was only about halfway to my destination and out in the middle of nowhere. For the first time, I began to realize just how vulnerable I felt. But what really made me start to feel uneasy was when he started asking me if I wanted a drink of liquor, indicating that he had several bottles with him in the trunk and that if I wanted some, he would pull over to the side of the road and mix me up a stiff drink. Because I was growing more and more uncomfortable, I declined his offer, saying that I did not drink, which was a huge lie, as even at that age I was already regularly drinking with friends, but he would not take no for an answer, and he kept insisting that I should really just have one drink, because he was such a great drink mixer and it would only take a minute for him to fix a very special one for me. After I had declined this offer for something like the 4th time now, he abruptly changed tactics again and began telling me a story about when he was about my age and a young guy in the army, and how he used to hitchhike a lot too, and how he would sometimes get picked up by men who wanted to pay him money to have sex with them. And had anything like that ever happened to me? By this time, I had quite enough of all of this, and I looked him straight in the eye and said, "No, that has never happened to me, and nobody had better offer that to me." Well, that knowing look vanished instantly from his face, and I could tell that he was totally irked by how I had just reacted to his story. That exchange between us totally changed the dynamic inside of the car, and he became very quiet. After a few minutes of this uneasy silence, he spoke up and told me that he was turning at the next intersection and that I would need to get out of there, even though he had told me when he first picked me up that he was going my entire way. At this point, I was actually very relieved and now only wanted to get out of the car. When the car came to a stop, I had just barely gotten out of the car and pushed the door closed when he stopped on the gas and zoomed off, literally jerking the handle of the car out of my hands. I remember that I stood there watching him drive away until he had disappeared down the road, and that my heart was beating very fast. I was both scared and angry at what had just happened. After I had calmed down, I resumed hitchhiking until I got another ride that took me home without further incident. Fast forward 25 years. It's 1999, and I had all but forgotten about my creepy ride with Town Car Man. I'm on the internet reading through a true crime website when I stumble onto a story about an ultra creepy guy named Robert Bennett, a man who had been arrested after a series of vicious attacks on men who he had picked up in his car, drugged, handcuffed, and then set their genitals on fire with a flammable liquid. The attacks took place over a 20-plus year period, starting around 1968 in the Atlanta area and ending with his arrest in 1991. Prior to Bennett's arrest, this attacker became known as the Handcuff Man, and talk within the local gay community was that he was targeting men who he thought were gay prostitutes. When I saw the photo of Bennett that accompanied the article, my jaw literally dropped open, and the memories of my ride that day in 1974 came flooding back. I was certain I was looking at a picture of Town Car Man, and I was absolutely floored. I do not have any way to prove that the creepy guy who picked me up was in fact this Robert Bennett, but the physical resemblance between what I remember about Town Car Man and the photo of Bennett is absolutely uncanny. And the persistent offer by Town Car Man to mix me a special drink and his questions about whether or not I ever had sex with men for money also seem to indicate that possibility. I should point out that even though this story took place in the early 70s in the deep south of Georgia, I was actually okay with gay people at the time and even knew a few people back then who were gay. So I didn't have a problem with homosexuality at all, and I still don't. But being heterosexual, I also had zero interest in having sex with other men. And even if I had game for that sort of thing, I always found it highly distasteful when people assumed that they could act in such an unwanted, cagey fashion regarding sexual matters with complete strangers anyway. I always have and always will find that extremely creepy. It's Sunday and I am bored, so I decided to finally put this on here for you guys to read. Back in 2005 when I was 18, I had just dropped out of high school in Minnesota. It was about halfway through the school year and I just didn't have the credits I needed to graduate. I had some health problems my junior year and was altogether frustrated with my life at this point in time. I was more concerned with drinking than I was with school, so I dropped out and bought a plane ticket and went to live for a while with my cousin and his girlfriend in Washington State. They lived in a town about an hour north of Seattle. I also had some friends that were a year older than me living down in Seattle. I would occasionally drive down to the city to spend a few days with them, go to concerts and things like that. After a particular stint in Seattle, I decided to head back north to my cousin's place. Me, being the financially impaired individual that I was at the time, I left Seattle without a dollar to my name. As I'm getting on the road, I notice I am very low on gas. I figure I can make it though, but of course about 20 miles short of my exit, the car that I am driving begins to putter and gasp for more fuel. Lucky for me, actually unlucky, I am coming up on a rest area. So I pull in and go to the payphone to begin to call the very few contacts that I know in this state. I had no money, so I had to call collect. So I get a hold of my cousin and he happens to be about 3 hours away in his hometown and drunk, no less. No luck there, so I call his girlfriend and she never answered. Everybody I know in Seattle doesn't own a car, so I'm kind of hosed. My cousin said he was coming home in the morning and he could pick me up on his way through. So it looks like I'm spending the night at this rest stop. So I get settled with my seat reclined and using a hoodie as a blanket. I'm there for about 20 minutes when a van pulls into the rest area. It was one of those Chevy Astro vans. The van parks and out gets your typical creeper. About 5 foot 5 inches, pudgy, balding, thick glasses. Creeper begins walking around the parking area, glancing into all of the parked cars. There were about 3 other cars at the time. He walks slowly right in front of my car and just stares me down for what seems like an hour. At this point, I'm pretty sure my future involves me being referenced in a documentary about serial killers. So the creeper guy gets back in his van and parks it so he is behind me on the other side of the parking lot. I am parked facing the bathroom area, and he is parked behind me facing the wooded area. At this point, I am no longer reclined and relaxed. I am now sitting quite awake, and I'm not taking my eyes off of this shithead. I can look in my side view mirror and see him in his side view mirror just staring at my car. This goes on for about 2 hours, and he would occasionally get out of his van and go stand in the woods in the darkness. I could tell he was still watching me because I could still see the cherry on his cigarette light up, as he would inhale. At this point, I'm pretty on edge and have to pee like crazy. There's no way in heck, though, that I'm going to walk into that bathroom with this guy around. I decide to call State Patrol and have them kick this guy out of there. So I ring the State Patrol and tell them the situation. They said they will send a trooper through. So I hang up the phone and I'm kind of pacing around while keeping my eye on this creepo. After about 30 seconds, the payphone rings. I'm thinking it's State Patrol calling back for some reason, and I answer. Me. Hello? Hey, can I touch it? Me. Shocked silence. Caller. Are you gonna let me touch it or not? Me. What the heck? Heck no. I slam the receiver down. The damn creeper has the payphone number and is calling me from the woods. I am slightly terrified at this point and I'm kind of frozen but ready to run a million miles an hour if necessary. I've got my eye on the woods. The phone rings again and I can't decide to answer or not. I don't want to miss State Patrol if they are calling for some reason, so I answer silently. Me. Silence. Creeper. Come on, let me touch it. I don't want to have to hurt you. I could even give you some money. At this point, this piece of turd has threatened me, so I immediately go into rage mode. I start quickly for my car when I remember there is an axe handle on the back end for situations like this, I suppose. As I'm walking towards the car, the creep starts out of the woods and is walking towards me. I get to my car, grab the axe handle, and start towards the guy, pointing it at him. "Hey dude, get back in your van and get the heck out of here or I'm going to bash your skull in." He stops in his tracks, stares at me, kind of assessing me, turns around, gets in his van and slowly drives away, staring at me. I'm completely shaking due to the adrenaline when the trooper finally arrives. So I tell him the whole story and he takes my information and says he can drive me up the highway to Denny's so I can stay the rest of the night safe there. And then he asks me if we can go first to the other side of the highway to see if the guy has just switched rest areas. I agree. We pull into the rest area and lo and behold, there's the van. The trooper approaches the van and is talking to the guy for about 5 minutes, and I can tell the trooper is giving him the third degree, sticking his finger in his face and raising his voice. The trooper returns and tells me the situation. Apparently there was nothing he could do to charge the guy at this point in time, which seemed odd to me, as the guy had threatened me and was soliciting sex at a rest stop. The guy didn't have a license. He claimed a friend had dropped him off and he was waiting for him to return. The trooper told him if he were still there when he passed back through, he would be arrested for trespassing, and if he or any other trooper saw him driving, he would be arrested for not having a license. The trooper also told me he had several pairs of binoculars and a large bag of candy in his front seat. Shudder. So I get dropped off at Denny's and my cousin eventually picks me up and I tell him the story. We have a good laugh being able to look back on it, and we go back the next day with a can of gas to get my car. End of story, right? Nope. We arrive in my car and there is a note under my wiper. From the damn creep. It was written in the form of a poem. I can't remember it exactly, but it was something like this. "You should have shut your mouth, you stupid bitch. Somebody should have taught you to never go and snitch. You should go and get back on mama's tit." It went on for several pages, but I can't remember more. The guy had cut all the brake lines and everything he could underneath the car. I called the troopers again. They came and took the note and took some more info. It wasn't even my car. A friend of mine had been visiting from Minnesota and wanted to buy a car in a road trip back to Minnesota. He decided against it and left the car and said I could use it, and that he would make plans to get it later. I didn't stay in Washington much longer after this. I spoke to an investigator one more time, but nothing ever came of it, and I don't know why. They knew who the guy was and everything. I was over it and I just wanted to move on. For the short time I was in Washington after this, my cousin and I would pull into every rest stop that we passed, hoping to find this guy. In retrospect, it's probably a good thing that we never saw him again because we were dead set on seriously hurting him. This is something that happened to me about 2 years ago, but thinking about it still gives me chills. I used to live in a small town in rural Missouri with my mom and stepfather. Our house was a few miles outside of town and along an old state highway. We were pretty isolated out there, other than the occasional passing car or farm equipment. One day I came home from a morning shift at work. I was pretty tired, so I immediately came in the front door and sprawled out on the couch. My mother and stepfather were preparing to go into town to visit a family friend. So I just started a movie and quickly drifted off to sleep. I remember waking up to the sound of my parents leaving. After that, I slept rather soundly. I must have been asleep for a couple of hours before I was woken up to the sound of the front door opening and closing. I lay silently, hoping to fall back asleep. I assumed it was just my parents returning from their visit. After a moment of silence, I heard an unfamiliar voice say, "Where is everybody?" My eyes shot open and I looked up to see a man standing over me. I had never seen this man before. He was very tall and muscular. He was wearing a white t-shirt with cut-off sleeves, and he was also covered head to toe in blood. I jumped to my feet instantly. I had never been so scared in my life. Trying to rationalize, I asked, "Are you looking for my parents?" He stared at me for a moment and asked who I was. I replied by asking, "Who are you and what the heck are you doing in my house?" He stared at me blankly. I thought I was going to be murdered. He kept talking incoherently and asking where everybody was. At this point, I had no idea who he was referring to. After about 5 minutes of nearly crippling fear, I realized that the blood that was all over his clothes and face was his own. I glanced out the living room window toward the highway. Then I started to understand. In the drainage ditch in front of my house was a red pickup truck. I told the man to come with me and we went outside. Soon after we got near the truck, another vehicle pulled up. Apparently, the man had been drunk driving and had driven his truck into the ditch. He was drunk and had a concussion from the wreck. He was so messed up that he had thought other people were in the truck with him before the wreck when, in fact, he had been alone. He had stumbled into the nearest house looking for help. The driver that had just pulled up drove the man to the hospital, and as far as I know, he was okay. Though I understand the situation now, I will never forget this. It was absolutely terrifying. When I was in 10th grade, my high school jazz band played 2 sets on the stage at the local fair. We had about half an hour between the sets, so a few of my friends and I decided to go for a ride on the Gravitron. That centrifugal force ride that spins you so fast that you are stuck against the wall. At the last minute, my friends chickened out and I was left to hop on alone. The 30-something typical mullet-clad ride operator looked me up and down as I climbed on, and I was not pleased to see that I was the only person inside the fully enclosed ride. Just as Mr. Carney was closing the door, an older man and his grandson hopped on, much to my relief. The ride operator was clearly annoyed, but apparently undeterred in his quest for underage poontang. He sat down in the control seat in the middle of the room, turned off the song that was playing, and started blasting "Feel Like Making Love" by Bad Company as the Gravitron began to spin. Faster and faster it spun, and he waggled his tongue lewdly at me while I was pinned to the wall like a helpless insect. As the ride stopped, I rushed toward the door at the opposite side of the chamber. The door opened automatically when the ride stopped moving, and the man and his grandson were right next to the door and exited within seconds. The carny rushed between me and the door and started to push it closed before I could escape while trying to push me against the padded wall. I kneed him in the balls as hard as I could and slid under the half-open door. I ran back to the stage and the ensemble had to perform 2 songs without the lead alto sax because I was shaking and crying off to the side. I pulled it together, picked up my horn, and jumped in on the 3rd song. When I looked up from my sheet music, I saw Mr. Creepy Carney standing in the back of the crowd, glaring at me with his arms crossed. He paced angrily back and forth while he waited for the set to end. As the last notes of the last song faded out, I ducked back to the guys in the trombone section and hurriedly explained what had happened. They immediately surrounded me and walked me away from the stage and back to the bus. The carny followed the group, ducking between the game trailers and rides, but couldn't get close to me. This wasn't the only creepy experience I had with the carnies, but it was definitely the closest call. Ladies, be careful getting on rides alone, especially if they are completely enclosed and you could be trapped with a carny who feels like making love. Every time I hear that song, I remember the sinking feeling in my stomach that day on the Gravitron. When I was about 8, we lived in a town that is generally classed as a deprived area. I lived with my parents and 2 younger siblings who were toddlers at the time, and my older sister by 10 years stayed often. We shared a large square of grass with the neighbors to our left as our front garden, and I used to play out on my bike a lot. Next door lived an older couple and their 2 teenage kids. I saw the dad all the time. He used to drive a really old orange car and wear an old-fashioned cap. He never spoke to us or even looked at us and looked sad as heck all the time. I would see the son cleaning his car but only saw the daughter briefly once or twice over the years we lived beside them. The only time I ever saw the mother was when she was peering through the curtains out of the windows. My parents made me aware that she wasn't a nice person, but I wasn't particularly worried and would cut across their side of the grass to get to my house on my bike until I saw her watching me. I remember thinking that she was a real witch because her face was terrifying. She looked so unkempt and knotted, tangled hair, and her face was just masked with anger. One Sunday morning, the son was cleaning his car and was listening to his radio unreasonably loud at 7 a.m. We had been to a family party the night before, so all of the children were still sleeping. My dad came outside to ask the boy to turn it down, as his children were sleeping, and then started to work on something in the garden. The boy didn't respond, but simply walked into his house. A few moments later, my dad heard shrieking and looked around to see the witch coming for him with a large kitchen knife. My dad is a pretty tough guy and fearless, so he must have been really shocked as he ran around the other side of the car while she was trying to slash and lunge at him, screaming all the time. This is when I looked out my bedroom window and watched them run around the car a couple of times before having a standoff on either side. My dad sent a missile of phlegm and saliva at her over the bonnet and told her if he had a gun that he would shoot her right there. My older sister came out instead with her arms crossed watching. There was not a lot more she could do without being killed. One of the neighbors called the police, and the son came outside and ran to his mother, snatching another knife hidden in her jacket. I thought he was going to join in, but instead, he took off down the street where the police chased him, and others tackled his mom. They found that the knife she was holding was a knife within a knife. A weapon, not a cooking utensil. The police told my dad that when they searched the house, they found the witch had carved words into the walls inside the entire house, such as kill, die, and murder. They also found blood splattered up some walls, with chunks of hair stuck to them, where she had attacked her daughter repeatedly. I found that part very distressing. Not only did that young lady have to emotionally deal with her mother's madness, but she also physically suffered regularly. My dad refused to go ahead with charges, as he said she clearly had problems and he would rather she had help instead. We never saw that family again, but the new family found many creepy things in the house when they moved in, and it took them a long time to make it a suitable place for their children to live. This is another story that happened in college. During my final year in college, I was living in a 2-bedroom on-campus apartment with 4 other girls. My actual roommate, Christine, is a sweetheart, and we are like sisters even now, after over 10 years of friendship. That was our 3rd year rooming together, and we even signed up for the same summer abroad programs. We like to joke that we've used up all of our roommate luck by finding each other because all of our apartment mates were interesting. The rest don't warrant individual stories on their own, so I'll just type it up in the comments. The other 2 girls sharing our apartment were Chelsea and Brittany. Chelsea was pretty normal, but Brittany was very problematic. She would often bring different guys home every night, which was fine except for the fact that she was in a relationship with a cop who carried a gun everywhere with him, and had serious anger and jealousy issues. Oh, and she would have sex all over every surface of the apartment. The night this incident happened, there was a St. Patrick's Day party with free concerts happening in the school, so there were loads of people on campus. Brittany and Chelsea have gone off to party, but Christine and I decided to stay home to binge on Friends reruns because we're so cool and lame. In the middle of our Friends binge session, we heard some hammering at our door. "Hey, can you let me in? I need to borrow your phone." It was a male voice. We immediately assumed it was one of Brittany's guys. Sometimes they would make up stories just to get into our apartment, then refuse to leave until she came back so they could hook up or get into shouting matches, usually cheating related. "What should we do?" Christine whispered to me. I knew what she wanted, but she was too nice to say it, so I said it for her. "Let's pretend we're not in here and not answer." We're in no mood to entertain a guy for a few hours while he waited for Brittany to get back. The guy banged on our door and asked to borrow our phone several times, but eventually gave up and left. We had fun watching the rest of the episode when our phones buzzed. We both checked our phones, and it was an automatically generated campus-wide alert text. There was a stabbing on campus. It was in our very apartment and happened in the unit right above ours. The stabber was an unidentified male, and he was still on the loose. I looked at Christy and asked her, could it be? She looked unsure but went, "Nah, it couldn't. Yeah, there's no way." We made sure that we barricaded the door to our room before we slept, though. In case Brittany brought Mr. Stabby home. I mean, she doesn't, yes, present tense, have the best taste in men. The next day, we read the school paper to find out more about the incident. Apparently, the guy knocked on the victim's door asking to borrow her phone. She let her in, and as soon as he was inside her apartment, he grabbed a knife from the kitchen countertop and stabbed her multiple times in the stomach. He was a complete stranger, and it seems that his only motivation is to stab someone. Since the campus was filled with thousands of people during the party, the guy easily slipped into the crowd and disappeared. Our apartment was on the ground floor and right next to the stairs. If somebody were to go knocking on every apartment, our apartment was most likely right before the victim's apartment. Christine and I definitely spent a few minutes shouting, "This is crazy. Wow." And stuff like that. Turns out having a shitty apartment mate may have saved us. Yes, there was an article about it in the news. And here's a detail that isn't in that article. The apartment was Levy 6. If you were a fellow Lion during that time, you'd remember that it was a month after there was a shooting over a high school basketball game hosted on campus. Fortunately for me, I was graduating in 2 months, so my mom couldn't pull me out of LA and make me move back to Indonesia ASAP. Yes, my mom received the alert too and knew our apartment's layout, so she also pieced everything together and realized it could have been me or Christine. This took place near northern Uganda. Now, northern Uganda has been basically stable for years, despite all the Kony 2012 nonsense, which here is viewed as exploitative BS, and things are healing and getting much better. I visited many times and enjoyed myself, and I have many friends who live in the north with zero issues. One weekend, my boyfriend and I were visiting the Murchison Falls National Park in the central west of the country. We had spent the afternoon on a game drive and decided to head back to Kampala, where we live, by going out the north gate of the park and driving around the park and then back down to our city. We are cruising along the smooth blacktop road. Thank you, China, and having a lovely time. After a while, we come to a car with two men sitting outside of it on the side of the road. My boyfriend has lived in Uganda for a while. We're both expats, and even lived in the north during the worst of the LRA wars. So he's not naive, and his spidey sense wasn't going off. We turn around and ask the guys if they're okay. They said they were fine and just waiting for a friend's car to come and grab them. We say goodbye and speed off along the road. All of a sudden, we come upon a lorry. A giant semi-truck with an open back parked on the other side of the road. There's a bunch of stuff scattered in the road, and so we slow down to about 10 miles an hour. We come closer and realize it's children's shoes. The lorry is not filled with children's shoes. It's filled with pallets and crates, and probably beer, but there are a good 15 to 20 pairs of shoes scattered near the lorry. Then we see three men. The three men were standing at various parts of the road. Two were in the middle of the road, near the shoes, and the other one was on the side of the road, cursing, screaming, and hacking the ground with a machete. He looked like he was hacking at nothing, and the machete was clean, but it was of course incredibly unsettling. My boyfriend has his window down, and all of a sudden one of the guys walks up to the car with his hands outstretched and a stop signal. We took one look at his face and are terrified. He has the classic 1,000-mile stare. His eyes are glassy, but not stumbling around like he's drunk. He just looks completely insane. Machete Man is on my side of the car. My window and locks are secure, because, of course they are. But pretty soon it seems obvious our choices will be to run over the glassy-eyed man or stop. I tell my boyfriend to floor it because screw it. If he stays, that's his own fault. We know Ugandans and Ugandan culture well, and this stuff is not anywhere close to normal or acceptable. Any Ugandan would speed out of there as well. My boyfriend revs it up, and glassy-eyed man jumps out of the way. Meanwhile, Machete Man is moving ever closer, and the third guy who was just standing there began to move towards the car as well. We weave in between the shoes. I found out later that my boyfriend was worried about anything hidden in the shoes that could puncture tires and speed down the road. Both of us really shaken up. We asked friends and colleagues about it, but nobody had ever heard of this stuff before, and if the LRA or another rebel group was attacking that area, that the news would have spread like wildfire. In addition, I have no idea if the two men down that road knew or had anything to do with it, but it felt like I should include it for context. We chalked it up to weird stuff that happens in Africa, but I shudder to think of what would have happened if our car had been disabled at the time.